Very happy to welcome our next guest, Hussein Chalayan. Actually, maybe a first question I was curious about was about you and London, and also you being dislocated, so as to say, from Turkish North Cyprus and living in London, and if you could tell us somehow about this, could be a good beginning.
In terms of why, or...
Yeah.
Right. Well, I am actually a son of an immigrant, ultimately. I'm here because my father moved here in the 60s. He became a restaurateur, and my parents met in Cyprus, and we came over when I was born. And ultimately, I think I cannot say I've always... I mean, I then went back to Cyprus, came back again. I've been really back and forth, so it's I mean, very loose, let's say. It hasn't been sort of that stable. But now I'm 35, I guess I've been mostly here. But really it's to do with my father.
And what led to this decision that you went to fashion school in London rather than Paris or New York?
Well, I mean, I was already studying here, so it felt like the natural thing to do. But and you have to remember, I think, if you have family somewhere, you are, you know, in a place because of them, and you know they support you or whatever. So it felt like the natural thing to do. And also, St. Martin's was a place which I wanted to be in. I felt it was the best of any kind of college I can go to. I had done research on it, etc. So it really felt like the natural thing to do. But in terms of afterwards, I guess what I do now has a lot more to do with other countries apart from London. I'm based here, but a lot of my relationships are outside London.
Can you elaborate?
Yes. Well, I think if you're a designer and you live in London, I think because London doesn't really take, in my opinion, sort of, let's say, creative thinking and fashion that seriously. I feel that a lot of people can kind of blossom here, but really they can only sustain their livelihoods by creating connections with other European countries, mainly. I mean, for instance, if Italy didn't exist, I couldn't really survive. So I think that, of course, you can have a certain level of work you can do here, but I don't feel within the kind of work that I'm doing, I could have actually survived here had I not created these other sort of connections. So I'm only here, I'm only based here because I think it's, let's say, I like the eclectic sound of London, and I can have friends from all different backgrounds. I think there's a certain level of liberalism that I enjoy, and yeah.
There was an earlier moment with fashion, encounter with fashion in this marathon, and I was voicing my admiration for the efficiency of fashion. I think that many fashion designers produce 300 types or prototypes a year, and for each of them they maybe have an average of 4 tests, so it is not rare that a fashion designer has to decide about kind of 1,000 or 1,500 items, and that impression, that efficiency is particularly important now. I think that the market is asking all of us. You know, we have also been speaking to young artists who simply couldn't kind of maintain the pace, and I think that fashion, you know, is about the pace, and therefore maybe a very important prototype for all of us. Yet your work, and particularly some of the challenges you put to yourself, most famously and perhaps in my eyes impressively, the demand at some point that each fashion item ends or begins as a piece of furniture. you seem to put yourselves challenges that are highly unusual. Why do you resist efficiency? Or is it a form of resisting efficiency?
I don't resist inefficiency. Well, how could I put it? I think there's a duality to what I do. I think I'm definitely your classic fashion designer in one sense, where, you know, me and my team, you know, we create a collection and we do fittings, etc. And then there's another side to what I do. Sometimes I can incorporate them into my collections, which is like the pieces you're talking about. I mean, fashion is an industrial process. It's not really about art, or it's not, unless you're doing couture, it's really about mass producing and delivering on time. And it's a seasonal project. You know, you have to produce one after another. And I think you constantly have to renew yourself. It's a very transient thing. Within that, I try to sort of, let's say, incorporate things that I feel are going to be more timeless for me and things that I feel I'm going to enjoy doing. To be honest, I think enjoying is a really important thing. I mean, and I think it shows through. And if you've enjoyed something, I think other people will enjoy it too, somehow. And I think, for me, I felt that I was doing one collection after another, and I was feeling quite restricted, and I felt I should really start to incorporate my other interests into what I was doing. I mean, I was kind of doing it in the early days, and I got caught up in this industrial thing that you're talking about, which is very mechanical and exhausting and difficult. So I decided to incorporate other things into it and present them together. And now I you know, I show my work in galleries, and I also sell my clothes in fashion boutiques. So it's actually an interesting duality. At times hard, because there's different concerns in each thing. But and let's say the way I'm showing it is different, showing the work is different, but the roots of the ideas are very similar.
What is interesting is that we've had actually many speakers over the last 24 hours who talked about this sort of boundarylessness, maybe, a boundarylessness of being sort of in different activities or even different fields at the same time. Yet there seems something very, very specific to your work, is that actually there is this sort of moment of transformation where suddenly a skirt turns into a table, turns into something else. So I was very curious to find out more about that.
So are you asking about boundaries in an abstract sense, or boundaries in...
Yeah, how this concretely works, how actually, I mean, it doesn't seem to be unusual now that, the practice of design, at the same time practice of fashion design, at the same time gallery exhibitions, that all these are sort of parallel realities someone can do. But what is very specific to your work is that sort of the objects in themselves seem to be able to transform, and suddenly a skirt becomes a design object, becomes...
I understand, okay. So, I mean, I think that I am very interested in change, and I'm very interested in sort of how something could evolve, how something could change form and change meaning as well, let's say. And I guess it's just to do with creating a life. I think a lot of my work is really about a lot of the clothes have a sense of life, let's say, and I try to create like a mini narrative for each thing. So it's about how a garment might evolve, or how a garment might have come from a story, and it kind of marks that story, and it's in a way a residue of that story. So I guess that's the main thing I have. I like things to have a sense of life. I like to be able to look at something and understand maybe what it's been inspired by, or where it's come from, and maybe that moment is a segment of the life it's had. So I guess this is my main, I am interested, and I'm excited by that.
I have a question and kind of confusion. You say you're exhibiting in boutiques and in galleries.
Selling in boutiques, yeah. Not
So selling in boutiques and galleries, or selling in boutiques and showing galleries.
Yeah.
And you say it with a kind of wistfulness that makes me think that you see that as a kind of form of endorsement.
What did you?
You say you mentioned the galleries and the art world as a kind of as if it is a form of endorsement.
No, well, it's just a different. I don't see it as endorsement. I see it as just a different platform, because I think there's a big difference in people consuming what you do and a big difference in them looking at it closely. And I think what an art gallery does is it gives you the platform to look at something closely, and when it's not also, let's say, on a catwalk situation. I mean, our shows aren't really typical catwalks, but. I mean, there's movement. You can't really. It goes in 5 minutes. I mean, I think what a gallery environment does, it helps you look at something closely, and I guess to enjoy it more, or be able to analyze it more. I don't see it as an endorsement. I think that, and also it's to do with, I never kind of declared myself as somebody that should, I never said, oh, please show my work in galleries now. It's something that's evolved over the years. I've been asked to. I've been given commissions. I've said, why not? Let's do it. One thing has led to another. But, I mean, I'm not one of those people that thinks that fashion becomes more worthy or more important when it's in galleries. I don't think that.
I was curious in a kind of a utopic dimension of your work, because a very sort of surprising work is this video, Place to Passage, which is somewhere between Jacques Fresco or the futurist or Bruce Sterling.
Yeah.
One sees these futuristic capsules actually connecting Istanbul and London. So I wanted to ask you about this sort of, wasn't for me not so familiar dimension of your work, this sort of more utopic or utopistic.
Yeah, you should watch it. It's
dimension.
Yeah. I think, well, that piece was, again, a commission, and I felt, I mean, at the time, that it can combine a few of my interests together, because I always think about, because I kind of feel like a sort of a displaced person in a way. I'm always sort of dreaming of either sort of Istanbul or Cyprus and my family and what they're doing now, and there's always been this sort of curiosity as to the sort of whereabouts of other people that I'm connected to, or other places, and my sort of existence here. So I think, I mean, this project was about sort of combining design and really my sort of thoughts, let's say. And the capsule was something that started in London, and it traveled to Istanbul in this sort of virtual environment. And the capsule was something that, in a way, represented this sort of constant state of movement, and where the environment kind of controlled also your activities, let's say, or your being. And really, it was about also about sort of going back into the womb, let's say, because it gets filled up with water as it goes into the Bosphorus. And it kind of felt like this sort of displacement to the extent where you go back into the womb. So this is sort of, in my sort of own abstract way, the sort of initial idea. And I felt that I didn't need people to recognize this. It was just really, in some ways, a banal journey. But these were my reasons for doing it. But again, processes are there for you to be inspired. You don't need to kind of explain yourself each time. But this was my reason for doing it. For somebody else, it's this sort of, let's say, meditative film where, it starts from one place and goes to another. And I guess Istanbul is a place where I spend a lot of time in through my work. And I have a fascination with it because I am, I'm Turkish Cypriot, I speak Turkish, but yet Istanbul is a place I'm, not really a native person in. I'm a voyeur, but yet I can kind of engage with it. So I think it was sort of really, let's say, a meditative piece based on these ideas.
We haven't yet spoken about your sort of link to architecture, and there is very often a kind of an architectural dimension in your work, yet you say in an interview which I read, I can't say that it's architectural, but it relates to space. It creates an interplay between event and place. The clothes become a catalyst to create experiences at an event. I'm questioning whether if you have an event in a space, does that turn it into a place? Now, you've actually opened your first Tokyo store, the first flagship store, and there you did not do yourself the architecture, but you collaborated with an architecture group from London, Block Architecture, and I was wondering if you could tell us in more general terms about your relationship to architecture, and then more specifically about this collaboration with
I
block?
mean, to be honest, I never thought that I had this connection with the architectural world. It's just that people start reading into your work and your interest, and they start to kind of label you because it creates something to talk about, to be honest. I think, I mean, I have got a general sort of interest in, let's say, space in relation to event. And I'm interested in sort of form and structure. I mean, in this case, with the shop in Tokyo, what we wanted to do was to create this sort of sense of being in one place and another at the same time. So I looked at my Cypriot background, and basically I wanted to recreate that in this really sort of synthetic Japanese environment. And this is what that project was about, and it was also about sort of the state of repose and the state of movement. So we had like the whole wing that sort of cut through the building was based on aeroplanes. So it suggested this sort of static movement, and we had trees growing out of the floor, and you sensed sort of travel, but it was static. And I kind of was interested in those, you know, in that contradiction as well. And it was a really fruitful collaboration because it wasn't so clearly like sort of drawn by them and proposed to me, I would say, yay or nay. It was really sort of, you know, with exchange and go through ideas, and it kind of evolved. I guess because of my interests, I mean, I couldn't have done it any other way. So,
I have one maybe final question. Right now there is a kind of very large and important issue whether Turkey should be part of Europe.
Surprise, this question was going to come.
And maybe it is a kind of more a European issue than a Turkish issue, because in some ways Turkey seems to be already moved beyond and forming other connections.
And other existences.
And other connections already.
Other connections with other parts of the world.
Yeah. Right. And doing it extremely well and kind of energetically and intelligently.
Yeah.
Somehow in London is the kind of part of the world where that issue and the whole issue of Europe is completely absent.
The whole issue of what?
Of Europe is completely absent.
Because of the whole Britishness, British Isle situation. Okay.
So do you have an opinion of Turkey and Europe?
I mean, my opinion about Turkey and the EU is much more on a sort of, let's say, cultural level. I think the more you isolate communities or countries, I think the worse things get. I mean, I think that an isolated Turkey would, I don't know where it would go, to be honest. Just simply on that level, forgetting sort of the rural Anatolia and how it needs to catch up with the Western Turkey, etc. Just the idea of embracing, I think, is an important thing. I think for a lot of Turkish people, their kind of culture, let's say the way they are, they feel isolated from the world is the biggest issue. And the way they kind of, let's say, have wanted to always become European, I mean, through the Ottoman times, etc. I mean, Ottomans were a multinational, multi-ethnic empire, not national, multi-ethnic empire. And I think that just on that level, it's enough to try and include them. I mean, if countries like Poland and many years ago Spain have been sort of, let's say, invited to
the same.
Yeah, I think in a way it will take longer because it's a bigger country with really a sort of a poor infrastructure in the east. I think it's a process, but I think it's. I mean, looking at this climate as well right now in the world, I think people are better off including Turkey, to be honest.
Eric Hobsbawm said when we prepared this marathon that we should not forget memory and sort of have a protest here against forgetting. So we thought it could be interesting to ask each practitioner we interview about something from the past which is still a toolbox. And so I was wondering if there is any kind of fashion designer out of the history of fashion design, or designer or architect, or any kind of other practitioner who sometimes for you is a toolbox for the present.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that well, there are various people, but if I think about it, I think for me it's not I haven't really looked at fashion as inspiration. Let's say, I mean, as I was growing up, I've always loved Hitchcock, for instance, and I've always loved various other, like Kieśkowski, for instance, who's a Polish director. I think that, to be honest, I haven't really had role models like that because I have such broad interests that I can't give you one person that's like my star. But I think film, because it's always about, let's say, a narrative, and I guess I'm like a storyteller myself. I mean, I guess that's been that's the nearest thing I can kind of, relate to.
And do you have a practice of writing? Do you write?
I don't literally sit and write, but of course, I have a notebook and I make notes and, but no, I don't. I can't say I write. No.
Maybe very last question.
Yes.
Is there a kind of unrealized project of yours, something, a dream, something you always wanted to do, which you could tell us about?
Yeah. I think that I would like to really belong to some kind of a group where things are constantly discussed, because I do actually feel quite isolated in London. I wish there was some kind of a body that I can belong to, because in a way, like what you're doing now, I would like that to be part of real life, because this is really an event. This is not really part of real life. I mean, I have no idea what all these different people who are speakers today, I have no, like I might know a few of them, but actually everybody's in their own bubble. I think my biggest sort of dream and the most exciting thing would be for me to belong to a sort of a group of people who are not so exclusive, who can invite other people constantly, where there could be things exchanged. Because honestly, what you're doing today is really a sort of, let's say, it's a synthetic event where people are brought together, but really London is people are living in little bubbles where there isn't really that much exchange going on. It's all very remote. This would be the most exciting thing for me.
Many, many thanks, Hussein
Thank
Chalayan.
you.
Thank you.